Welcome to Content Unpacked. Our guest this month is Tosca Looby, one of Australia's most celebrated creative storytellers in factual television. She works as a director, writer and producer with the Sydney-based production company Northern Pictures. Tosca's built a remarkable body of work across hard-hitting social issue documentaries. Having trained in journalism and program making, her work is infused with rigorous research and narrative clarity. Her credits include groundbreaking series on SBS, including Asking For It and See What You Made Me Do, as well as feature documentary Strong Female Lead, an archive-driven exploration of the challenges faced by Australia's only female Prime Minister, Julia Gillard. Now, audiences are set to see her latest major project on ABC, The Matter of Facts, a new 3-part documentary series produced by Northern Pictures and presented by Hamish McDonald. This documentary goes to the front line of global information wars, examining how truth, misinformation, and digital ecosystems shape what we believe. Tosca, thank you for unpacking with us today.
Pleasure.
So look, let's just get a little bit of your background. So why don't you tell me about where you're from and really what got you interested in documentary making in the first place?
Yeah, I did a arts degree and then I did a master's in international journalism in London, and I was very interested in journalism, which I guess is all about storytelling. Then I got this amazing opportunity in the UK to join a team of 6 program makers, and we were trained up in every aspect of television. And the 6 of us were then tasked with producing an hour of live television every day.
Right.
And it was in the days of kind of early streaming, so it was really bad, but it gave us such a great opportunity to make mistakes and to learn what our talents were and what our, I guess, less talented aspects of the whole process were. So some people became very good editors. Other people went in front of the camera. Others were interested in sound design. And my interest was absolutely, and had been the whole way through, in storytelling and in that whole concept that you can begin a story from nothing and build it into something fascinating and coherent and that does really surprise people. So I actually then went into natural history, into making documentaries as part of the whole BBC documentary system in Bristol in the UK, which I loved and would take me out into the field to do amazing projects about all sorts of different animals, and it took me all over the world. Then I came back to Australia and joined the Natural History Unit at the ABC in Melbourne, and then became freelance and started working in social documentary, and have been there ever since, really.
Amazing. Yeah, cool. Such an interesting proving ground of opportunity. It's like a kind of university for, documentary, I guess, or filmmaking. So do you recall the first piece of media that really got you interested in how it was made? Do you remember that experience?
Yes. I went to a film festival and I saw a documentary about 3 brothers who lived in a very, very remote location in the US. And they all obviously had all sorts of different learning issues, but they were sitting on a really valuable piece of land, and they were framed for having murdered someone. And they lived in a very eccentric way. The 3 of them slept in a bed together. The house was just full of newspapers. They were hoarders. They were completely off-grid. And it became this kind of David versus Goliath battle when people realised that these people had been framed, and the community came to their defence to get them off in the courts. And that whole process, I guess, of watching a story like that play out about these nobodies who actually had this fascinating story and an amazing story of community coming to their rescue against a kind of a force that seemed much bigger than they were. And it was just this beautifully made documentary called My Brother's Keeper, and that got me on the road to thinking, this is absolutely what I want to do. I want to tell these stories that otherwise would get lost in the tracks of time.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, that's beautiful. And is there a something recent, a favorite piece of media or content recently that you've come across that's had sort of a similar effect or has kind of, reignited that feeling?
Yeah, look, I think it's really interesting how documentary has evolved in the time I've been working in it. And obviously, the genre of documentary has got very mixed up with the idea of reality television. And I think people are a lot less sure about what documentary is these days than say 20 years ago. And I think that's brought positives and negatives to the work that we do. Because I think the cross-genre element can be really interesting from a filmmaker's point of view. So there's a lot of sort of, drama documentary work going on, for example, where as a director of documentary, you become a director of drama as well, and you're melding those skills. So there's some really interesting work out there from that point of view. I also think feature documentaries still have a really important place in our lives. And I saw one just last week. I was at the Australian Documentary Conference in Melbourne, and it reminded me of a film called Porcelain Wars, which is about two artists in the Ukraine, and it's about their lives during the war. And they're using the symbolism of their artistry, making these incredibly delicate artworks out of porcelain. There's really nothing more delicate than porcelain, but you can't destroy it. And so they're using this analogy for for Ukraine, but also looking at what it's like for these people right in the middle of Kiev when it's being bombed, and they're continuing to do the only thing they know to do, which is make these little beautiful figurines, and until actually they get trained and start joining the war effort, and it becomes obvious that it is the members of the public who are defending Ukraine. So it's a really fascinating piece of work where you are right in the epicenter of this story that is, I think, compelling for the whole world. So yes, that made a big impression.
Yeah, beautiful. So there's really story at the heart, and stories that, unless somebody's documenting them, they will go unnoticed, but are so fascinating. That's a real driver from day one for you. And I guess in terms of like ideation, in terms of developing a new idea, where do you source these ideas from? Obviously that's what you're driven towards creating, and that's what you do create. So where do the ideas get sourced from, and how do you sort of take that idea into a production level, and how do you know if it's primed for production?
So there's no shortage of ideas. I, like most documentary makers, am absolutely full of ideas of things that I would love to make. What is putting the brake on that is what you can actually get commissioned. And you really need to have an understanding of what broadcasters are looking for. Otherwise, you're just kind of screaming into the abyss. So I have worked in the industry long enough and am lucky enough to have close relationships with broadcasters. And I guess there's a lot of trust that's built up over time. And so I am pretty conscious of what it is that they're looking for. So, and I guess you also kind of land in certain train tracks as to what you make. And again, that can be good and bad. So we at Northern Pictures make a lot of social issue documentaries. So the broadcasters will often say to us, okay, well, what's the next big social issue that you're going to unpack? And so that's the way I will think. But I will also then say, okay, for the series work that I've done, I now want to do another feature documentary, because that's, I think, for most of us, where your heart lies and where you can really tease out those stories that tend to be more passion projects than what the broadcasters are looking for to answer all the questions on their slate.
Interesting. So there is a bit of a tension between the kind of passion projects and the things you want to do, and what needs to keep things ticking along commercially, and what people are crying out for as well. That's really interesting. And so in terms of those ideas for either of those streams, how do you sort of test them out to see that kind of viability and if there is enough of a story there?
Yeah, that can be an interesting process. So there are ideas that appeal to some people and not to others. And they might appeal to one commissioning editor and not another. And you've got to get someone to get in behind your idea and fight for it. You can't do it alone. And so it is about writing a pitch and coming up with a marketing argument that is going to sell that idea. And you've got to do it really simply. You've got to do it in one line. So people can immediately understand, okay, I can see this film, I understand what it's about, and I want to watch it. All in one line.
Yeah.
So that's the way into it. And you become more and more skilled at doing that. So it could be something really complicated. I mean, the series we've just done, Disinformation, is incredibly complicated, but you can still sell it in a line.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the quite interesting challenge that you're often faced with. And maybe, you give them a half page. If you give someone 10 pages, they're not going to read it. They're just, you're just going to irritate them that you've given them such a kind of unwieldy document to have to fit into their day. So, yeah, I guess as most marketing experts know, it's about the clean, clear, immediate sell.
Interesting. And so I guess when you've got those really current hot button issues, there's a bit of a shorthand involved there. People are already sort of primed for it, and there's particular language that you can lean on. When it comes to projects that don't have that necessarily, that are more esoteric or, less familiar to people, is there an art to doing that for these pitch documents as well? Is there an art to getting that hook?
Yeah, definitely. I think, so an example might be, we do the series Love on the Spectrum. And when that first began, so for anyone who doesn't know, the series is about people who are on the autism spectrum looking for love. And that can be very difficult if you're socially isolated and you have trouble communicating. And so it's about bringing people together. And what's beautiful about that program is people are very unguarded. They speak very honestly with each other, and they aren't doing the kind of, I guess, protective mechanisms that a lot of us do in our daily interactions. And so it's a very refreshing show for people to watch because it is just so honest. Of course, you don't know all that until you make it, and that's how it pans out. But in the very initial inception of that show, somehow you have to communicate that that is what you're aiming for, and that you really do think that you can achieve it. That that you can convince a broadcaster that you've come up with a concept that is going to emotionally capture people. Yep. And again, to do that in half a page can be quite difficult, but you have to really try and understand what is it about the audience that's what's going to appeal to the audience with this concept.
Yep.
And what is it emotionally that they need from it, and why now? Why this moment in time?
Yeah, beautiful. So are there any projects that really almost didn't make it to that final stage because of these barriers that you're talking about, of getting that commercial interest and being able to communicate what's going to make it special? And just wondering how you actually overcame those obstacles to, see it into production.
There's so many projects that almost didn't make it. So I guess a difficult example is we did a 3-part series about domestic violence, and SBS wanted it. They knew that as part of their charter it was something they should do. But as a filmmaker, I was left with the problem of how do you make this something people would actually, after a hard day's work, sit down and watch. And so that involved finding a vehicle for this series that felt like it could let people into this really difficult subject matter. And one of the ways to do that was to find a really great host who knew the subject matter. And I found an author, Jess Hill, who had written a book, See What You Made Me Do. And that book had introduced this whole idea of coercive control. And it was sort of the first time that people were hearing this language. And so we concentrated on that, this concept that people didn't understand yet, but was starting to see play out in police experiences when they turn up at people's houses after a call for help and then be told that actually nothing to see here, there's nothing wrong. That's one very small example of how this might play out. But we then were tasked with the challenge of turning that into storytelling that actually used real people who'd had those first-hand experiences, who could tell this experience, who could tell the story of this, as well as observational documentary that allows you to feel like you're right in it. So that is an example of taking a really difficult topic. And we created this series that was the highest rating show on SBS that year, including drama.
Incredible.
And obviously that was also because there's a real need out there in society. There was something that they needed unpacking there that really brought the viewers in a way we never imagined would happen. But it just goes to show that you can take a really difficult social issue that feels untenable, feels too hard, and there's ways you can, the word that's coming to mind is soften it. It's not really softening it, but it is allowing people a doorway in that they can walk through.
Yeah.
That doesn't feel too unwieldy.
Yeah, that's an incredible success. And I wonder how difficult it is to ride that line of having a story to tell, having that story be a challenging one, and wanting to preserve the integrity and truth of that, but also managing to tell something that will invite people in, that does have some kind of narrative structure. Is that a balancing game, or is it a matter of how you describe, there's just, you find that natural pathway and things flow on from that?
It's a real balancing game because you're leaving so much out. There's 3 hours sounds like a lot of television, but actually you're really only scratching the surface of a problem that is such a massive social problem with an issue like that. So you really have to make a lot of careful decisions about what's the really important information here that people need to be offered up to come out the other side of it saying, okay, I can see something now that I couldn't see before I started watching this series. And we did get amazing reactions from people. For me, one of the most touching was a man who wrote to us and said, I'm in my 80s and I was just walking past the television because my wife was watching your series, and it's not something I would ever actually have chosen to watch. But I sat down and I started watching it, and I thought about my mother having left me and my brothers when we were quite small. And I have held it against her my entire life. But I started understanding that she had to leave. She knew we were safe. She was never going to be safe. And she made a decision that now suddenly makes sense to me, and I can forgive her.
Wow.
And when you get a story back like that, it's like, wow, okay, well, sometimes you have to imagine a really small audience. And if you can hit that audience, you've done what you needed to do.
Yeah. Yep. That's an extraordinary thing, actually. Yeah. Beautiful. And when dealing with these sort of sensitive and complex subject matters, and obviously most recent documentary is really about the search for truth, how do you verify truth? How do you check for truth and ensure that that's being carried through the whole way?
So this is such a massive part of the work that I do. So when you're doing a series about mis and disinformation, you can't afford for it to be peddling mis and disinformation, obviously. So we go through an incredibly rigorous process of fact-checking ourselves. It goes through our process and then it goes through the ABC's process. Everything is footnoted, so everything in the script that you don't see as a viewer is actually very heavily footnoted to back up everything, all of our claims along the way. We're very conscious of what sources we're using and very cognizant of, first a high tier of fact checking via our sources. And then it goes through an incredible legal process as well, both at our end as a company and then again via the ABC. So the fact checking process is very long-winded from the moment that we begin looking at stories right through to signing off on those final scripts. And it has to be.
Of course, yeah. It's a huge body of work running alongside the creative and production process as well. Yeah, that's quite extraordinary. And what about when it comes to sort of keeping your personal views separate from the content that you produce? Like I imagine, as we discussed, you are personally drawn to these subjects and feel an investment and an opportunity and a kind of desire to tell these stories. But how do you ensure that you remain neutral, or do you not? Like, what's the kind of guidelines for you there?
Yeah, that's such a good question, and it's hard sometimes because, of course, we all come at things with our own preconceptions. I often find as I get into it, my preconceptions are challenged the whole way through the process. And that's as it should be. Often I will change my mind about something entirely as I progress through the process. People can talk you around, and that's how it should be as well. That you should have the input of so many different opinions on things, and that is actually a really interesting process. And I think as a filmmaker, you have to constantly challenge yourself to allow that to happen. I have a particular friend who's an incredible pedant. And every time I'm in the middle of a project, I will make a point of talking to him about each individual story, and he will throw up all sorts of questions for me and say, but have you thought about this? But what if you look at it from this angle? But what does so-and-so say about it who you haven't looked at yet? And for me, that is a really vital process because it makes me look at it from many more angles than I might naturally do.
Yep.
And I think that's the interrogation you need to put yourself through constantly to say, am I being biased about this? Am I bringing my own biases to this? Where do I need to acknowledge those and challenge those? And make sure you just keep doing that the whole way through.
Yeah, beautiful. Because I imagine that can have one or two effects. It can either cement or galvanize your thinking and make you realize that you're right all along, or it can challenge that and lead to a change of point of view. When that happens, during the production, is that a good thing? Is that kind of baked into the process that need to kind of change and shift as you go, or is that throw things into chaos?
It can throw things into chaos because you might intend to go out and put together a certain story, and a third of the way into it, suddenly it's not the story you thought it was. And that should never determine your initial concept about what this story is going to be shouldn't determine the outcome in my mind. You need to allow yourself to adapt to how that story is changing. And obviously you're still, your hand is still on it. You're still leading it along. But I do think a skill of documentary is to, unlike drama where you've got a script and you're going to ask someone to stand in a certain position and say something, and that is what's going to end up on screen. In documentary, the whole idea is you don't really know what's going to happen. You're going to have a framework and you're going to put yourself in a position to capture something you think is going to happen, but ideally it actually doesn't.
Yep.
Something completely different happens that surprises you and turns you in another direction. And the best observational work is that.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. So, I mean, in these cases too, do you feel as though, I mean, how often do you start with a sense of where things are going to end up, and how often do you just allow the story to take you there? Is that structure in place most of the time, or is it something that is developed and felt out as you go?
I always start with a sense of what I think is going to happen. I actually script the whole thing out.
Right.
So I will have a baseline, and at the very least, I will achieve my baseline. At best, along the way to that baseline, I will get a whole lot of surprises along the way, and it will take me on different tangents, and it will make me think, okay, I need to actually investigate something back down this way and take myself down there and find a surprising new angle to the story, or a new story altogether, or a character who's had a completely different experience to the one we thought we were exploring. So yeah, you always need that baseline, not just for yourself, but to give a whole crew a sense that you know where you're going with this, and you're all on a track. But and certainly the broadcasters need to know what it is that you're planning to deliver. You can't say to them, look, I've got this vague idea and I'm going to head out and I'll take a camera and I'll see where it takes me. They're never going to accept that.
Yep.
You have to convince them that you have a coherent idea, and at the very least, that's what you're going to deliver.
Interesting. And what about, I don't know if there are too many examples of this where things have veered so wildly, of course, but you obviously have that initial pitch phase to bring people on board. In the end, when you're coming back to the important stakeholders and producers and so on, is there ever an issue in that delivery process? Do things need to be rediscussed or re-examined, or are they brought along the way for the journey so there aren't too many surprises at the end? Just wondering if there's sort of a reverse pitch at the end that occurs.
Yeah, that's a good question too. Yes, constantly reverse pitching.
Right, yep.
So the best thing to do is to sort of keep everyone well informed about what changes are happening along the way, because it can make people really nervous if they suddenly get into an edit suite and they're looking at something that is nowhere near what they thought they were going to be looking at. So you really have to kind of keep that reporting going to say, actually, this really interesting thing has happened and I'm going to justify changing my scheduling or changing my plan to follow it. And because there's so much money involved in these, there's big crews, every day our costs are high for being out in the field and filming things. It makes everyone very nervous if suddenly you're completely veering off plan. So yeah, I do a constant process of reporting back, but then also in post-production, you come back with hours and hours and hours of footage. So when I'm sitting with an editor, you're constantly trying things that may or may not work, and replanning how a story is going to play out that way. And so it's not about going back out and filming things necessarily. It's about saying, okay, throw that story out. Let's not use it at all. Let's now go in this direction with this story that is coming before the one we thought it was going to be in line with, and change the way we're coming at this. So again, it's all about that adaptability and not getting too attached to your initial ideas.
Yep. Allowing it to breathe. And
I think it's an interesting process for anyone coming from drama into documentary. I think it can be really hard to let go of that sense that, but I had a plan and I had it scripted and I knew exactly what was going to happen, to saying, I don't really know, but I have to have confidence that I'm going to make something of this.
Yep.
And that's an experience thing. You've got to have done it enough times to know, I know what I've got in the bag is a good story. I don't know what that story is yet, maybe, but I know I've got it.
Yep. Yep. And I imagine then it's important to have the crew members that really work on that same level as you and have those same attributes of curiosity and the stamina and appetite for stories, and as they grow and change. And I imagine that's quite important for the kind of production to coalesce in that way. Quite curious about you mentioned having hours and hours of footage at the end of something. At the end of this long journey of creating something, is that an exciting feeling or a fatiguing feeling? Do you sort of hit that level and think, oh no, the real work begins here? Or is that still, have you got the stamina still working to the finish line?
I love the post-production period. A lot of directors don't go all the way through. So they'll deliver footage and then say, okay, see you later. But it's not, because I'm doing kind of thesis-based ideas, you can't really hand it over and say, look, there's a thesis in there somewhere on this big social topic and I'll leave you to find it. it's a process for me that I need to go all the way through with very trusted editors who can see a story in there with me, and we start building it together. So yes, it can be overwhelming to sit there and think, okay, what are we going to make of this? But I actually find that a very exciting moment, because you start looking back through what can be 6 months of filming and remembering, oh, there was that moment. And it always looks different in the edit suite to the moment it felt when you were filming it. I'm always surprised how often I think, oh, that was such an emotional moment. We were all crying. It felt so big, but actually it's not working in the edit suite.
Wow. That's fascinating. Why is that? What happens? Is it just the kind of translation to a piece of footage, taking it out of the room experience, or is it just because you're so in it that it's heightened? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it can be all sorts of things. I mean, I've had examples where you have to anonymize people, and once you anonymize them, you don't feel it anymore. You can't maybe see, maybe there's restrictions around what you can film, and if you can't film the whole process that you experienced in real life, it just suddenly loses its power, its impact. But it's a very strange thing. I would have thought I've been doing it for long enough that I can feel the difference between a real life emotion and what's going to work on screen. But actually, I'm still constantly surprised. And with the reverse, where I'll be filming something and thinking, this isn't really working. And then get in there and think, actually, I can totally see how this is going to work.
Wow.
And in the edit, we make it sing, you know.
It's amazing. That's very cool.
This episode is brought to you by Contentful. Marketers, you know that feeling when your creative just clicks? When that new social post sends engagement and likes through the roof? When your exciting outside-of-the-box campaign hits ROI positive? When that personalised homepage convinces prospects to become customers? It's utter marketing bliss. A little something we call feeling so contentful. With Contentful, you and your team can build bold, omni-channel experiences tailored to every customer segment without working overtime. No stress, no limits, only possibilities. Come get the feels at contentful.com.
Okay, so let's talk about your latest documentary, which is The Matter of Facts. Can you talk us through the background of this story and what led you to it?
So this was a series that Hamish came to us with, journalist Hamish MacDonald, and it was really at that point kind of a word, disinformation. Let's do a series about disinformation. And I must admit, I immediately thought, oh, yes, that's great, because I feel as though everything that we talk about at the moment somehow relates to misinformation, disinformation, this weird relationship we're now having with truth. And so I was very excited to take up the challenge, especially of trying to corral a subject that by its nature is invisible, is designed to be invisible, or is designed to look like something it's not. And that was immediately a really interesting process. Obviously, it's a very international story, so the disinformation that we're dealing with in Australia is often also the disinformation that is global. And so we did look at it from a very international point of view that is relevant to Australians as much as anybody else in the world. But in doing that, we particularly, for example, looked at the different versions that disinformation can appear as depending on where you are in the world. So, for example, we went to Taiwan, which is dealing with some of the most oppressive disinformation in terms of volume that's coming from China. And there's a campaign to change the thinking of the Taiwanese people around who they are and what Taiwan is as an independent nation and its relationship with China. And so that disinformation campaign plays out in all sorts of ways you wouldn't expect, including looking at historically that a lot of social media content from China that's generated, could be AI generated, to convince the Taiwanese that there is no other story. You are part of China. There's no other way of looking at this. And so really interesting to unpack a campaign like that and talk to the people on the ground in Taiwan who are trying to recognise it and alert citizens to this campaign. You know, you really are getting deep into the weeds of people's everyday lives and understanding how it is that they're getting information, how they're consuming it, and how that then plays out in their ideas and their attitudes and their relationships with other people. And we did that in Belarus, Poland, London, the States, Japan, the Philippines. And what I guess was interesting about the process was this playbook that you see. That actually disinformation is designed to do something in terms of changing attitudes and thoughts. And once you start unpacking it, even though it can take all sorts of different forms, it is the same playbook. So it's been a really interesting series to put together, and also, I guess, to tease out how as individuals we imagine we're kind of immune from disinformation, but in fact we're not. So we also did a social experiment with 10 average Australians, and we tested them with a whole lot of sort of psychological testing. We used 2 cognitive psychologists to run these experiments, and they were completely surprised, well, the psychologists, but also the participants, about the results.
Wow.
About how they responded and why they responded in certain ways. So we're really looking at our own innate psychology that makes us so incredibly susceptible to misinformation and disinformation.
That is fascinating. I was going to ask you if there's anything that did challenge your preconceptions or anything particularly new that you learned on the way, and that sounds like one of them, you know, how unaware of our biases and the way that we think and how that has been shaped seems like a really integral part of this story. And how deeply embedded culture is in information as well. Seems like this in particular is really sort of weaponized storytelling that we're kind of grappling with. Does this, you know, having done this documentary series, did it make you more or less concerned about the future? Do you feel as though we're getting to a point where we can be more literate and be more aware and have greater defenses? Or do you feel like that's just continuing to be eroded as we go along?
I feel very nervous about what social media is doing to us. And I worry about the fragmentation of information and the way that it's coming at us. But the series is also about offering a roadmap, and so saying you can create a system for yourself where you are much better protected than if you don't interrogate where your information is coming from. So for me, I started that. We were doing a lot of traveling too, and so you're sitting in airports all the time just scrolling, and I thought, wow, I am getting dumber and dumber the more I spend time doing this. So I made a conscious decision that I would stop doing it, and I would read long form, and I would choose certain issues and read the long form version of those rather than just taking bite sizes of everything. And what that meant was I kind of took myself out of the news cycle as well a bit. And it's been a good experience.
Liberating, yeah.
Yeah, to say, okay, I need to understand this issue, but I will choose certain pieces that have been written about it and I will read them in their long forms. I won't take a headline as I scroll from my own echo chamber and decide that I understand this issue.
Because, I mean, we are, whether it is disinformation or truthful information, we are bombarded by it. You know, there is so much of it out there. And every day something's trying to call our attention. And with this kind of increase in information and with these new platforms that you're talking about, social media and so on, these must have been some of the big things that you've witnessed over your career in terms of how that has reshaped the industry to some degree. Is that fair to say? Have you seen a significant change from where you began to where things are at now in that way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, all of us know that we've started consuming information in a completely different way. The whole information ecosystem has massively changed. And in this series, we look at the people who own those platforms and the incredible power that they wield and the impunity with which they now put out disinformation, misinformation, and have eroded fact-checking processes. So that in itself is something we need to all be very conscious of, and now throw AI into the mix. And yet again, as we did with social media, we just look at this as an inevitable process, that this is where technology is taking us, even though in theory we're meant to be in control of the technology. So I think that's something for all of us to interrogate, this idea that there's an inevitability to it, that we are just on a road and AI is going to take us wherever it takes us. And that to me is a very scary thought.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, I mean, I guess for somebody that would be coming up, a new generation of documentary makers, many of these people have grown up with social media, are growing into AI very quickly as well, which obviously has become integrated into so many platforms and tools that we use every day. For someone that is entering this field, what's your advice, and how do you see a way to navigate through these issues and complexities that you're talking about?
So first thing to acknowledge is it's really hard. It's a really small pool of money in the Australian industry and everyone's competing for it. And so first I'd definitely acknowledge that I understand it's really hard to break into. It was for me too, but I think it's got even harder. And I think the most important thing is to have a lot of confidence in your ideas. Young people are coming through all the time with these fantastic ideas, and to look at things from their own unique perspective, having grown up with social media possibly as their only form of viewing. They maybe have never watched free-to-air television. It does give you an important perspective and important ideas about how information it can now capture an audience in a way that you feel is going to do your storytelling justice. So I think to develop skills to be able to communicate those ideas is the very first step along the way. So it's hard to get an audience with a commissioning editor, but don't be frightened of them. They are there, paid by taxpayers in terms of the public broadcasting system, to hear your ideas. So contact them, work out what their email addresses are and contact them and give them your ideas and get an audience with them. They're not so scary. They are looking for new ideas. That is their job. And they'll reject you. They'll probably reject you many times, but that's all part of the process as well. And ideally, in that process, you get better and better at being clear about your ideas. I would advise people to do their research, look at what it is that is already on. If you're going for the public broadcasters, ABC and SBS, if you're going for the platforms, what they're actually commissioning in terms of Australian content, and be quite educated in the way that you target them. So you know that this is the kind of thing that they're looking for. They are looking for a certain length of program and how your idea fits into that structure. Don't go to them with an idea of something that's already just been done in a very similar way on air. Don't go to them with an idea of something you know that they've never published before. Your chances are so much lower. So I think it is about being really strategic about who you're targeting and making sure that you're giving them what it is that they're looking for in terms of structure, but an idea that can be quite original.
Yep.
Everyone is in theory looking for original ideas.
Yep. Interesting. And I mean, I guess, on the positive side of social media, it does offer people a platform where they can publish immediately. If they're seeking to get a name for themselves, they're struggling to get funding or support behind a project, it does offer this ability to get information, potentially build an audience if you do have that ability. Do you find that within the commissioning space and within the space that you work, there is still that strong push to preserve the long form art form, the features, the miniseries, the TV series, over and above the social side? Or do you think that there is a strong mix in play now, like with all these different channels? Do you see the industry heading in one way or another, and they're guardians protecting what it is that you do? How does that look at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I keep talking about the public broadcasters because that's mostly who I work with. I'm less able to talk about commercial. I mean, we do also, as Northern Pictures, we're also on Netflix, and so we're doing streamers as well. But look, I think what tends to be happening in terms of the public broadcasters is ideas, concepts, presenters, new talent are emerging on social media. And so that is feeding into then longer form programming, I guess more traditional forms of programming on the public broadcasters. So I think that is a very natural avenue to broadcast. It's obvious that people are building audiences via social media themselves. They're doing it organically. They don't need a broadcaster to come and tell them, okay, I'll give you your 15 minutes. They are creating content that is building an audience. That, I think, is fantastic. And if that's how we can discover new talent, whether it's program makers or presenters or DOPs, then that is a really great proving ground. And maybe it doesn't need to move on from there. I mean, YouTube is obviously now an amazing platform for people to be able to do their work exclusively on that platform. But it's hard to make a buck.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, that's a problem for everyone.
Yeah, it's definitely it's not as easy as it seems too, I think, in terms of you not only have to be creating the work and creating work that's going to land and have an impact, but you need to be your own marketing department as well. And, obviously there's a generation of people that are growing up with a clear knowledge of how these platforms work and how engagement works. But that marketing side of things is still a elusive skill for a lot of people, I think, the actual groundwork that's needed to build an audience. Obviously, you yourself have managed to come through at a time where you've been able to build an audience through the strength of your work. How do you see that kind of landscape now where you kind of need to be both? And have you found that you've also needed to step into that role a little bit more as time goes on, or are you comfortably sitting in your space?
You mean to move into social?
Well, no, just to be able to sell yourself. Is that something that I guess, are you feeling the heat of competition that comes through and needing to put in the extra level of work at Northern Pictures and so on to sell these things? Or, is there a kind of comfortable coexisting ecosystem with people that are coming through on these platforms and, a veteran like yourself?
Yeah, it's interesting, actually. I was at the documentary conference last week and I was laughing with a couple of people about the fact that suddenly we're the old guard. But I have a very vivid memory of being the unpublished filmmaker who just wanted to get my foot in the door and thinking, how do I ever get in on this and break into this society of people who are really getting their programs on the screen. And so I completely acknowledge how hard it is and that it can feel like an unattainable thing. I guess another thing I just wanted to say for young filmmakers is we get a lot of programs pitched to us and they're often unformed ideas. So you can have a concept about something that in theory sounds great, but what's it going to look like? What is the structure of that idea? And that's where a lot of people fall down. And when you start interrogating them on it, they don't really know. So I think that's something that you really have to train yourself to do, whatever kind of storytelling you're doing, that you need to have in your own mind a really solid idea of that structure, of the framework that you're using to make this idea work. And I think that can be a really hard and initial challenge. And it's great to work with other people, mentors who can help you through that, especially if you've never made something before. But again, that's why social media can be a great proving ground. Interestingly too, Tropfest has just happened again.
Yep.
So after 7 years of no Tropfest, we just had this very popular Tropfest moment again, where there were so many films submitted. I think there were 16 chosen to be screened. And for young filmmakers, that is still obviously a really important vehicle. And they're using it.
Yep.
So I think that that's interesting, that social media hasn't changed that idea that you want to get your film out on a big screen and you want an audience to sit in front of it and watch it. And you know, it almost takes us back to the argument about cinemas will die because of video, or these kind of fears we always have about.
Yeah.
So I think the place of long form, this is slowly getting back to the question you just asked, the place of long form documentary still exists. And I hope it is part of what I was just talking about, that we are feeling so fragmented in the way that we're getting information coming at us, that I think increasingly we will feel, I need a more in-depth, cohesive version of this to understand my world.
Yes.
And that is what long-form documentary offers you.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we live with so much complexity, and complexity that you've been dealing with, you know, in terms of information, which is just so hard to put your hands around sometimes, that, you know, obviously there's a great skill to be able to simplify things into a short format, but some things need that space to breathe. They need the full investigation and the full context and understanding and the mechanics of how they work. So, you know, without that, it seems like we're not really going to be able to address the issues that we have unless we have that mechanism for, you know, dealing with complexity in full, as opposed to just simplifying everything down so much. But I wonder, just to circle back to that notion of actually putting together a coherent story to be able to pitch or to be able to talk about, do you have any advice on how to actually, you know, sharpen those skills and how to, you know, put that together and, you know, get people to really think through beyond an idea?
Watch loads and loads and loads of stuff.
Yeah.
I think there's so many good examples out there of how it's done well. And you know, as a viewer, when that happens, when you watch something and you think, that really grabbed me, I got it, and I was entertained, and I've come out the other side not also looking at my phone the whole way through the viewing experience. I stuck with one screen.
Yep.
I think you've got to do plenty of that to really understand yourself, the kind of tricks that people use to put these stories together. And in your own mind, if it's the direction you want to go in, break it down, analyze it. In series with a presenter, for example, they're constantly landing you back as a viewer where you need to be to orientate you before you move on to another story. There's what is, when it's done well, an invisible structure there that actually, if you watch it carefully enough, you can pull all those elements out. So really, to educate yourself about how this is done, you need to kind of interrogate the process. Look at when it's voiceover, look at when it's pieces to camera, look at when it's observational, and how those different versions of a documentary are used together.
Yep. Yep. I love that. I mean, I think that, being a viewer is so important to become a director in the same way that being a reader is so important to become a writer. I actually remember hearing a story about Paul Thomas Anderson, the filmmaker, and he's adapted a couple of novels, and he says that he begins the process by rewriting the novel to understand the rhythm and the feel and to get into the world of it. So I think that just that immersion that you're talking about, understanding the vocabulary of it and understanding the mechanics of it is a really fascinating thing. At the beginning, you mentioned My Brother's Keeper as a documentary film that really influenced you. Do you have a quick syllabus for us that you can pass on to people that, aside from your amazing work, that you can recommend that kind of do that really kind of are formative or get to the core of those kind of structural elements that you're talking about, that can really help people, develop some guidance?
Yeah, I mean, it all depends on the style of what you want to do. There's so many great examples. There's a channel called DocPlay, and it's quite cheap to subscribe to it. And almost every documentary that ever was is on that platform. So I would absolutely encourage anyone to subscribe to DocPlay. And then on that, depending on your interest. So, for example, there's an amazing documentary called Navalny, which is the story of Navalny, who stood up to Putin in Russia and offered a true opposition leader. He had a huge following, and I'm not ruining the end of the documentary for people to understand that he is killed by the regime. And that is a first-hand reporting. The filmmaker is right there with him the whole way through his process of campaigning from outside Russia and then returning to Russia. He's poisoned along the way. It's incredibly gripping, but it's also this really, really intimate portrait. A film like that is great to look at from the point of view of an observational filmmaker. And then if you want to look at how to make things that are far more structured, a series that I thought was really well done, swear warning here, it's called Don't F*** with Cats.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a series that's on Netflix, and that is fantastic in terms of a very, very structured, orchestrated storytelling that is using first-person narrative to tell a story that's already happened historically. So again, pulling out ways that people have used, have been able to tell a story that is historic. And maybe there is not much visual material to retell that story. So how do people get around that challenge?
Yep.
Who have they got on screen to help you immerse yourself back in a story that actually you can't be there firsthand, like the filmmaker was with Navalny?
Yep.
And so it's really important to look, I guess, as a practitioner, as an interrogator, at how people have used all sorts of different tricks to make that work.
Yeah. Yep. That's brilliant. I guess it's that question of like, how do you literally fill a space and time when you may not have any content at all, but you have a great idea? A great exercise, I think, in figuring that out. That's going to set you up pretty well, no matter what story you're telling or where you're telling it. In the production stage, so you've got obviously many different moving parts and all the issues that we've discussed so far. I mean, I'm wondering what the biggest pain points and the most common issues are along the way that kind of happen routinely, and how you deal with those.
Well, interestingly, it's the legals. It's getting through the legal process, dealing with what you can and can't put on screen. And you can put a whole great show together that you love, and then a lawyer comes along and says, you can't say that and you can't use that footage.
Wow, yeah.
And that's potentially defamatory and change the whole thing around.
Right. And that happens fairly often? Always.
With what I'm doing. I mean, it doesn't when it's not as controversial, I suppose. But, yeah, so that's a really hard part of the process, and you often can't preempt it. You've got to kind of put something together for them to critique. Right.
And so the solution to that is obviously the edit. How often is that going to really change the story?
Yeah, you've got to kind of think very carefully about all of those legal issues, obviously, but then you still want to push the boat out. And so it is almost as a filmmaker that you definitely want to get into territory that's going to be debated by your legal team.
Yep.
Otherwise, you're kind of not doing your job.
Yep.
And then we work with a fantastic lawyer who spends a lot of time in court, so he really knows kind of how defamation happens. So he's really great in saying the chances there are zero.
Right.
And so, yes, you can get away with that. But if you give me this, I'll give you that.
Right.
You know, you do
Yep.
a bit of horse trading
Yep.
for them to be able to sign off on a project.
And so, I mean, I guess with that, the buck really stops with legal. Like if legal don't approve or they can't be convinced, then it doesn't happen.
You've got to convince the lawyers because we as a company are exposed. We as the producer will be done for defamation.
Right. Right.
Or
Yep.
inaccuracies or whatever
Yep.
it is. So, yeah, that's
Yep.
a really tricky and can be quite a soul-destroying process.
Yeah, of course, of course. I mean, that's an interesting thing too, just in terms of your team and the people that you work with. You know, we sort of discussed this a little bit, but obviously, you know, on your crew, you want people that you trust, that are there for the journey and that are obviously specialists in what they do. And I imagine it's probably good to have some degree of tension in there to make sure that people are keeping each other in check. But then, you know, having that broader team where you've got lawyers and you've got producers and you know, your commissioning body and all that sort of stuff. Is it important that you're all aligned? Is it important that you all are shooting towards the same thing, or is it better actually to have a mix of people that are kind of helping shape this thing with you at the helm?
Look, I think that's the answer lies somewhere in between. But for me, those collaborations are the best thing about doing this job. You collaborate with people who are just as passionate to make this really good. I work with a director of photography, Aaron Smith, who's amazing and has that beautiful observational eye that he can, out of the corner of his eye, see what's going on to the left of him or to the right of him. And he knows when to move and when to make his camera put pressure on people and when to pull it back. It's those kind of people who have that really beautiful sense of other human beings that makes the job joyous.
Yep. Yeah, the beauty of collaboration and necessity, I think, with these things, right? You know, you can't have that huge skill set that's required to make a film all on one shoulder. So yeah, that's a wonderful thing. Yeah. And I mean, is there any way of, you know, identifying those qualities, or does that just come about through experience and working with people and getting to know people? Or, you know, how do you find these people?
Yeah, it is about collaborating and learning who works with you well and who doesn't. And it is different for everybody, obviously. But again, I think there's so many great young future industry stars who are already experimenting with their particular medium.
Yep.
And I'm coming across them, and I'd love to keep doing so. You know, I think you don't want to get too tied into the same people all the time. It's great to range across and collaborate and mentor different people. So, yeah, I think that's the process you go throughout your career. And sometimes it works out better than at other times, but generally, you know, you as well as a practitioner have to adapt to be able to work with all sorts of different people.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, Tosca, thank you so much for unpacking your work and your industry today. And it's been a pleasure to speak to you.
My pleasure.
Great.